Morning, Facebook. Here today we're looking at Psalms chapter 49, looking at verse 15 through 17. And you see in verse 15, you see how the psalmist here, how he's saying that God has saved his people, how God saves us out of each and every affliction, how he parts the waters, out of every difficulty that we face. When we take our eyes off that situation and we put our eyes on God, when we start looking at God as we once used to look at that pain, once used to look at that inconvenience, once used to look at what we think is the source of the trouble in our lives, once we allow our mindset to now view God the way we once used to view everything else in our lives, then we see true change. Then we see how everything in our lives is subject to change. But the only thing it's based on is our perception. Are we willing to let go? Are we willing to look away? Are we willing to look to God? Are we willing to trust in God with the very things we struggle with most? With the very things that cause us the most pain in this life? You see, he's saying here in verse 15 how God has saved us, how he's brought us out of every single wilderness that we've been through in our lives. And then you see in verse 16, he says how we have no reason to worry. As believers, as children of the Most High God, we have no reason to worry. Not only because of everything God's done in our past, out of every single battle that we've been through, when we look to God, how he makes a way. How he makes a way where there is no way. How he makes the impossibilities in our lives nothing more than his realities. How he can bend everything when we just turn to him, when we just set our eyes on that throne of grace. We see how everything in our lives can change, how he can make peace appear in our hearts, even in the midst of the most hellish situations that we happen to find ourselves in. And you see in verse 17, he says even in the midst of that, when we're tempted, even the greatest temptation we'll face to look away, when we get that human thought in ourselves, what can we do? How can we make ourselves feel better? He's saying here in verse 17, stay focused on the cross. In and of that moment, that most imperative moment when you're in that crossroads and you want to feel better, you want to take care of that situation, you want things to change, you can do something. You can look at what you can do, or you can look at what Christ can do when he was nailed on that cross. You can look at what the power of the blood can do in your life when you properly apply it. And he's saying here, stay focused on God. Look to God. Look at everything he's done. If he can bring you out of the wilderness then, he can do it again. But you see, that reminded me of the words of Christ to the church in Ephesus, how they forgot their first love and started looking at everything else. You see, us as Christians, so many times we allow our love to grow cold and lukewarm because we look at everything else in the midst of our trials. But as we start our day, we remember our love for Christ, how his love for us pushed him even to the midst of the cross.